In the world of rock and roll, few figures loom as large or as enigmatic as Neil Young. A man of contradictions, Young has been called everything from a musical genius to a cantankerous troublemaker. But behind the iconic voice and searing guitar solos lies a soul haunted by demons that have both fueled his artistry and threatened to destroy it. Picture this. It's 1976 and Young is on stage at the Budokan in Tokyo. Suddenly, he raises his beloved Gibson Les Paul above his head and brings it crashing down, splintering wood and sending shockwaves through the stunned crowd. This isn't some punk rocker or metalhead. It's Neil Young, the sensitive poet of folk rock, lost in a moment of raw, uncontrolled emotion. But what drove this gentle soul to such a violent act? What forces have shaped, and some might say shattered, the legacy of one of rock's most enduring figures? From childhood illness to substance abuse, from personal tragedy to political fury, Neil Young's demons have been his constant companions. They've driven him to create some of the most powerful music of the past half-century. But at what cost? Today we dive deep into the troubled waters of Neil Young's psyche, exploring the turbulent journey of a rock and roll survivor who spent a lifetime dancing with his demons. Early life and rise to fame. Neil Young's story starts in Toronto, 1945. Born to Scott Young, a sports journalist, Neil wasn't exactly destined for rock stardom, but life had other plans, and its first curveball came early. At 6, young Neil got hit with polio. It left him with a slight limp and a hell of a chip on his shoulder. "That disease didn't kill me," Young later said, "but it made me stronger. It was the first big fight of my life and I wasn't going to lose." This fighting spirit would define Young's career. By his teens, he was already gigging around Winnipeg, playing in bands like the Squires. But Canada was too small for Neil's ambitions. So, in 1966, he packed up his 1948 Buick Roadmaster hearse. Yeah, you heard that right, a hearse. And hit the road for LA. Young named that hearse Mort, by the way. Talk about foreshadowing. In LA, Young fell in with a crowd of musicians that would change rock history. He hooked up with Stephen Stills, and together they formed Buffalo Springfield. Their hit, For What It's Worth, became an anthem for the anti-war movement, even if Young insists it was just about a riot on Sunset Strip. But it was with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young that Neil really made his mark. Their second gig ever, just a little festival called Woodstock. No big deal. On stage, Young was a force of nature. His guitar work on Down by the River left jaws on the floor and ears ringing. Off stage, that's where things got complicated. See, even as CSNY were riding high, Young was itching to go solo. He'd release his self-titled debut in '68, but it was after the gold rush in 1970 that really announced Neil Young as a solo artist to be reckoned with. By the time Heart of Gold hit #1 in 1972, Neil Young was a bona fide rock star. He had it all. The hits, the recognition, the money. But success sat about as comfortably on Young's shoulders as a straitjacket. "Heart of Gold put me in the middle of the road," Young famously griped. "Traveling there soon became a bore, so I headed for the Ditch. A rougher ride, but I saw more interesting people there. Little did anyone know that Ditch would turn out to be a rabbit hole, one that would lead Neil Young on a decades-long journey through the darkest corners of rock and roll. Artistic restlessness. So there's Neil Young, sitting pretty at the top of the charts. Heart of Gold is playing on every radio station, and record execs are practically begging him for more of the same. Time to cash in, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. See, Neil Young's got this itch. An itch that says, "Hey, you know that thing you just did that everyone loved? Yeah, don't do that again." It's like he's allergic to success or something. Take Harvest, his biggest selling album. Most artists would have milked that cow dry. But Neil? He looked at all that success and said, "Nah, I'm good." Then he went and recorded Time Fades Away, a live album full of new material that sounded nothing like Harvest. The fans were confused. The critics were baffled. The record company, they were pulling their hair out. But Neil was just getting started. He followed that up with On the Beach and Tonight's the Night, completing what fans now call the Ditch Trilogy. These albums were dark, raw, and about as radio-friendly as a car crash. Young once said, If you're going to be a rock star, you'd better do it with some style. Well, deliberately torpedoing your own success? That's style, all right. But here's the kicker. These commercial failures are now considered some of his best work. Go figure. This pattern would repeat throughout Young's career. Just when you think you've got him pegged, he pulls the rug out from under you. In 1982, he put out Trans, an electronic album that sounded like Kraftwerk on a bender. His label, Geffen, actually sued him for making music uncharacteristic of Neil Young. Can you imagine? Getting sued for being too creative. Then there was his rockabilly phase with Everybody's Rockin' in '83, and his country turn with Old Ways in '85. It's like he was playing genre roulette, and the wheel never stopped spinning. When grunge hit big in the '90s, who should show up but Neil Young, the godfather of grunge, rocking with Pearl Jam like he'd invented flannel. The guy's a musical chameleon, but instead of blending in, he sticks out like a sore thumb. A very loud, very talented sore thumb. Critics have called him everything from a genius to a madman. Maybe he's both. Or maybe he's just a guy who can't sit still, artistically speaking. Young himself put it best. I'm not here to be a role model. I'm here to follow my muse, wherever it takes me. And where has that muse taken him? To country roads and electronic highways, to grungy garages and twangy honky-tonks, to critical acclaim and commercial disaster, sometimes on the same album. But through it all, one thing's for sure. Neil Young has never, ever been boring. Frustrating? Sure. Confusing? You bet. But boring? Not on your life. This artistic restlessness, this refusal to be pinned down or pigeonholed, it's been Young's constant companion, his blessing and his curse, his demon, if you will. And buddy, this demon was just getting warmed up. Substance abuse. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Or should I say, the monkey on Neil's back. The 70s rock scene was a non-stop party, and Neil Young was right in the thick of it. Booze, cocaine, you name it. If it could alter your mind, chances are Neil gave it a spin. But this wasn't just your garden variety rock star indulgence. Nah, Neil Young doesn't do anything halfway. Take the story of Danny Whitten, guitarist for Neil's band Crazy Horse. In '72, Young was prepping for a tour, and Whitten was strung out on heroin. Young gave him an ultimatum: get clean or get out. Whitten couldn't hack it, so Young fired him and handed him a plane ticket home. That night, Whitten OD'd. You think that might have scared Neil straight? Think again. Instead, he doubled down. The guilt, the grief, it all went into the bottle, up his nose, or into his arm. Young's drug use went from recreational to full-on self-destruction. During the recording of Tonight's the Night, an album that dealt head-on with Whitten's death and the OD of roadie Bruce Berry, Young insisted the band drink tequila before every take. He was chasing authenticity through artificial means, trying to capture the sound of despair in a bottle. I'm not a preacher, Young later said, but that album was my way of saying, this is what drugs do. This is what loss feels like. If it made even one person think twice, it was worth it. But even as he was sending out warning signals in his music, Young was sinking deeper. His performances became erratic, sometimes brilliant, sometimes a train wreck. Often both in the same show. There's a bootleg recording from a '73 show where Young rambles incoherently between songs, barely able to stand. The audience laughs, thinking it's all part of the act. It wasn't. Young's longtime producer David Briggs put it bluntly. Neil was pretty much on everything back then. It's a miracle he survived, but survive he did. Unlike so many of his contemporaries, Young managed to pull himself back from the brink. It wasn't quick, and it sure as hell wasn't easy. There were relapses, close calls, and more than a few burned bridges along the way. By the mid-'80s, Young had mostly cleaned up his act. Mostly being the operative word. He's been open about still enjoying the occasional toke, but the hard stuff, that's in the rear-view mirror. Young reflected on this period in his autobiography, Waging Heavy Peace. The drugs are now off my table. I am now clear-headed. I'm trying to be like an old Zen master from the 60s and 70s, but I wasn't even a young Zen master back then. The thing about demons, though, is they don't just vanish. They lurk, they wait, They find new forms. And for Neil Young, kicking one habit just meant making room for another. But we'll get to that. For now, let's just say that Young's battle with substance abuse left its mark on his music, on his relationships, and on the man himself. It's a chapter of his life that he's put behind him, but one that still echoes through his work to this day. After all, you don't dance with the devil without learning a few new steps. Personal tragedies. You'd think after battling artistic pressure and substance abuse, Neil Young might catch a break, but life had other plans. This is where things get personal and tough. 1978 rolls around, and Young becomes a father. His son Zeke is born with cerebral palsy. It's a curveball, sure, but Young and his then-wife Peggy take it in stride. They're rock stars, right? They can handle anything. Then, 4 years later, their second son Ben is born. Also with cerebral palsy, but far more severe. Suddenly, Young's world is turned upside down. This isn't the kind of problem you can solve with a guitar riff or a line of coke. This is real life, hitting hard and fast. Young, never one to do things by halves, dives headfirst into fatherhood. Those long nights once spent in the studio, now they're spent in hospital rooms. The energy that used to fuel epic guitar solos, it's all going into physical therapy sessions. In his song My Son, Young lays it bare. When I hold him in my arms, he looks just like any other kid. I know he's doing the best he can. I know exactly how he feels. But here's where Young's stubborn streak, the same one that drove record execs crazy, becomes a superpower. He and Peggy look at the lack of educational opportunities for kids like Ben and Zeke, and instead of getting mad, they get busy. In 1986, they found the Bridge School, an educational program for kids with severe physical and speech impairments. It's not just a school, it's a mission. To fund it, Young calls in every favor he's got. The result? The Bridge School benefit concerts. We're talking Pearl Jam, Bruce Springsteen, Tom Waits, a who's who of rock royalty, all showing up to play acoustic sets for the cause. For a while, it seems like Young's found some balance. His music takes on a new depth. Albums like Freedom and Harvest Moon show a softer side of Neil, a man coming to terms with life's challenges. But life isn't done throwing punches. In 2014, after 36 years of marriage, Neil and Peggy divorce. It rocks the music world. Peggy, who'd stood by him through thick and thin, who'd inspired classics like Such a Woman and Once an Angel, is suddenly out of the picture. Young doesn't say much about it publicly, but his album Story Tone speaks volumes. In Plastic Flowers, he sings, "It's because of love I'm standing here. It's because of love that the sun shines. It's because of love I'm crying now. It's because of love I'm dying inside," raw stuff, even for Neil Young. But here's the thing about Neil. He's a survivor, always has been. These personal tragedies, they don't break him, they reshape him. They find their way into his music, into his activism, into the very fiber of his being. Young once said, "As you go through life, you've got to see the valleys as well as the peaks." Well, he's seen some deep valleys. But true to form, he keeps climbing, keeps pushing, keeps making noise. Because that's what Neil Young does. He takes his demons, his pain, his struggles, and he turns them into something powerful, something real, something that connects with people on a level that goes beyond just music. And buddy, he was just getting started. Political controversies. All right, buckle up. We're about to dive into the murky waters of Neil Young's political activism. And let me tell you, these waters are choppy as hell. See, Neil's never been one to keep his mouth shut when he sees something he doesn't like. Whether it's war, environmental destruction, or corporate greed, Young's got an opinion, and he's not afraid to shout it from the rooftops. Or better yet, sing it from the stage. Remember Ohio, that hard-hitting response to the Kent State shootings? That was just the beginning. Young's been waving his protest flag high and proud for decades, but it's his later career activism that's really ruffled some feathers. Take his crusade against the Alberta oil sands. In 2014, Young embarked on his Honor the Treaties tour, comparing the oil sands development to Hiroshima. Yeah, you read that right. Hiroshima, needless to say, That didn't go over well with everyone. The Prime Minister's office accused him of hypocrisy, pointing out his own carbon-heavy lifestyle. Young fired back, "If you got a problem, take it up with me. But this is about the treaties, not about my lifestyle or my bullshit." Then there's his beef with Monsanto. Young's 2015 album, The Monsanto Years, was a full-on assault on the agribusiness giant. Monsanto's response? They invited Neil to come tour their facilities. Something tells me that invitation's still sitting in Young's spam folder. But wait, there's more. Young's been a vocal critic of Donald Trump, even going so far as to tell Trump to stop using his song "Rockin' in the Free World" at campaign rallies. Trump's campaign claimed they had paid for the rights. Young's response? "Fuck you, Donald Trump." Not exactly subtle, our Neil. And just when you thought he couldn't stir up any more trouble, Young goes and picks a fight with Spotify. Yep, in 2022, Young demanded Spotify remove his music over pandemic misinformation on Joe Rogan's podcast. It was a principled stand, sure, but one that cut off millions of fans from his catalogue. Young didn't back down. I sincerely hope that other artists and record companies will move off the Spotify platform and stop supporting Spotify's deadly misinformation about the pandemic. Some called him brave. Others called him a cranky old man who needed to stick to music. But here's the thing. For Neil Young, the music and the message have always been intertwined. He once said, "I'm not trying to change the world. I just know what's going on, and I don't like it. I don't have a choice in the matter anymore. I can't take it, and therein lies the rub." Young's political stances aren't just some PR stunt or a way to stay relevant. They're an integral part of who he is as an artist and a human being. But they've also alienated fans, sparked heated debates, and at times overshadowed his musical legacy. Is Neil Young a principled activist using his platform for good, or an out-of-touch rock star who should stick to what he knows best? Depends who you ask. But one thing's for sure, Neil Young isn't about to start holding his tongue now. In a world where many artists play it safe, Young continues to charge headfirst into the fray, guitars blazing and middle fingers raised high. It might not always be pretty, but damn if it isn't pure Neil Young. Aging in rock time, that sneaky bastard comes for us all, even rock gods. And Neil Young? Well, he's been giving Father Time one hell of a fight. Let's face it, the rock and roll lifestyle isn't exactly known for promoting longevity, but Young's been defying the odds for decades. Still, even he can't completely outrun the clock. In the 90s, Young started battling epilepsy. We're talking full-on seizures, sometimes right in the middle of a show. But did that stop him? Hell no. He'd just shake it off and keep on rocking. Then, in 2005, Young had a brain aneurysm. Doctors went in, did their thing, and told him to take it easy. Young's response? He finished an album he'd been working on. Because of course he did. But it's not just health issues. As Young's gotten older, his voice has changed. That iconic high tenor that wailed through Heart of Gold, it's gotten rougher, grittier. Some critics have been, well, less than kind. After one particularly harsh review, Young shot back, "They're all just looking at me like I'm old. I'm not done. I'm not close to done." And he means it. While his contemporaries are slowing down or cashing in on nostalgia tours, Young keeps pushing forward. New albums, new sounds, new causes to fight for. In 2019, at the ripe young age of 73, Young released Colorado with Crazy Horse. The critics who'd written him off? They had to eat their words. The album was a return to form, proving Young could still bring the heat. But here's the kicker. Young doesn't seem to give a damn about growing old gracefully. He's growing old defiantly. "I'm not ready to hang up my rock and roll shoes," Young declared in a recent interview. "There's still fire in my belly and songs in my head. As long as that's true, I'll keep on keeping on." And keep on he does. Tours, albums, activism. Young's plate is as full now as it was 50 years ago. Sure, he might move a little slower on stage these days. The hair's a bit grayer, but the fire? Man, that fire still burns bright. In a world obsessed with youth, in an industry that often treats aging artists like yesterday's news, Neil Young stands as a defiant middle finger to the very concept of acting your age. Because for Neil, age isn't about slowing down. It's about digging in, speaking up, and rocking harder than ever. After all, rust never sleeps, and neither does Neil Young. Legacy and impact. Let's get one thing straight. Love him or hate him, you can't deny Neil Young's left his mark on rock and roll. Two-time Rock and Roll Hall of Famer? Check. Inspiration for an entire generation of grunge rockers? You bet. But Young's influence isn't just about music. This is a guy who's been fighting for family farmers since 1985 with Farm Aid. He was talking about environmental issues when most of us thought organic food was just a fancy way of saying expensive. Young's stubborn refusal to compromise has been both his superpower and his kryptonite. It's given us some of the most authentic, powerful music of the past half-century. But it's also led to some head-scratchers that make you wonder if he's just messing with us. I'm looking at you, trans. His political stands have fired up fans and pissed off critics in equal measure, but for Young, standing up for what he believes in has always trumped record sales or streaming numbers. Through all the artistic zigzags, substance abuse, personal tragedies, political firestorms, and challenges of aging, Neil Young has remained unapologetically, well, Neil Young. He once said, "I don't like to be labelled to be anything. I've made the mistake before myself of labelling my music, but it's counterproductive. The music just needs to be out there, floating around with the air molecules." And that's Neil Young in a nutshell. He's not here to be what you want him to be. He's here to be Neil Young, for better or worse. In the end, Young's legacy is like one of his epic guitar solos. Wild, unpredictable, sometimes messy, but always authentic. It's a legacy that says it's okay to be difficult, to be contradictory, to be human. Because that's what Neil Young is. He's not a golden god or a flawless hero. He's a man who's lived life on his own terms, who's faced his demons head-on and channeled them into his art. And as long as there are guitars being strummed and voices being raised against injustice, Neil Young's impact will be felt. Not bad for a kid from Toronto with a bum ticker and a beat-up guitar. Young keeps on rocking, keeps on speaking out, keeps on being a thorn in the side of the establishment. He's like that weird uncle at family gatherings, the one who says uncomfortable truths after one too many beers. You might not always like what he has to say, but damn it, you know he means every word.